Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we dive into today's case, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Now let's get into the story. The air smelled clean, crisp even, as I made my way along the Appalachian Trail. The familiar crunch of gravel under my boots was a soothing sound, one that I had come to associate with solitude and peace. For me, hiking these woods wasn't just an escape, it was a ritual, a way to shed the weight of everyday life and immerse myself in nature's raw beauty. Today was no different, or so I thought. I inhaled deeply, the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves filling my lungs, as I glanced up at the canopy of oaks and maples towering overhead. The forest was thick this time of year, with the late summer sun casting long shadows between the trees, dappling the trail in soft light. I had planned this hike weeks ago, looking forward to a weekend away from the hum of the city and the endless demands of work. Just me, my gear, and miles of untamed wilderness. About 2 hours in, I paused to take a drink from my canteen. I looked around, letting the serenity of the forest sink in. It was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet you only find deep in the woods, where the only sounds are the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional call of a bird. I glanced at my map and compass to check my bearings. Only a few more miles, I muttered to myself, deciding to make it to the clearing where I planned to set up camp before dusk. As I continued, the silence grew heavier. At first, I didn't think much of it. Nature has its moods, and the forest can feel different depending on the time of day. But this quiet felt unnatural, like something had sucked the life out of the woods around me. There was no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, no chirping of birds, just the wind, soft and low, like a whisper through the trees. A cold shiver ran down my spine, though I wasn't sure why. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the unease creeping into my thoughts. It's just the isolation getting to me, I reasoned. Too much time alone in the wilderness can play tricks on the mind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I scanned the forest around me, squinting into the dense shadows. The trees stood tall and silent, their thick trunks almost black in the fading daylight. But in the corner of my eye, just beyond the edge of the trail, I thought I saw movement. I stopped, holding my breath. Nothing, just the wind stirring the branches. I exhaled slowly, trying to laugh it off. "You're jumping at shadows, Mark," I whispered under my breath, as if speaking aloud would shatter the tension that had suddenly gripped me. I kept moving, but my senses were on high alert now. Every small sound made me flinch, the creak of a branch, the crunch of dead leaves underfoot. It felt like the woods themselves were watching me. A few minutes later, I rounded a bend and saw something strange. The ground ahead of me was littered with broken branches, and the underbrush had been flattened in a wide swath, as though something massive had plowed through. I crouched down, running my fingers over the snapped wood. The break was fresh, the bark still moist where it had splintered. "Must have been a bear," I mumbled to myself, but even as I said it, I knew it didn't feel right. I'd seen bear trails before, and this wasn't the same. Whatever had come through here was bigger, much bigger. My stomach twisted with a sense of foreboding, but I forced myself to keep moving. The clearing wasn't far now, and I told myself I'd feel better once I had my camp set up and a fire going. The sun had just dipped below the horizon by the time I reached the clearing, casting long shadows over the forest. I set my pack down and got to work pitching my tent, trying to distract myself from the growing unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. The silence was oppressive now, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. The only sound was the crackle of my fire as it came to life, small but steady. As night settled in, the world around me seemed to close in. I sat by the fire, warming my hands, staring into the flames. For the first time in years, I felt uneasy being out here alone. I couldn't explain it, but something wasn't right. A rustling noise from the edge of the clearing made me jerk my head up, heart hammering. I squinted into the darkness beyond the firelight, but saw nothing, just the faint outlines of trees, swaying gently in the breeze. "Probably a deer," I muttered, though my voice sounded hollow, even to me. I was trying too hard to convince myself. I stood up, peering into the shadows, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. That's when I heard it, a low, deep sound like a growl coming from the darkness. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, straining to listen. The growl came again, this time closer. It wasn't the sound of a bear or a wolf. No, this was different. It was deeper, more menacing, like something from a nightmare. I grabbed my flashlight, pointing it toward the sound, but the beam barely penetrated the inky blackness of the forest. I couldn't see a thing, but I knew something was out there. Watching. Waiting. Who's there? I called out, my voice shaky. The growl stopped, replaced by the deafening silence once again. For several minutes, I stood there, flashlight in hand, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I backed slowly toward my tent, never taking my eyes off the tree line. I crawled inside, zipping the flap shut behind me. The fire outside crackled weakly, casting faint flickers of light against the canvas walls. But it didn't make me feel any safer. I lay there, clutching my hunting knife, listening to the silence outside. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and for a moment, I could almost believe I'd imagined the whole thing. Just nerves, I told myself. You're fine. But as I drifted off to sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind, like a warning I couldn't shake. Something was out there, and it wasn't done with me yet. I jolted awake in the dead of night, my breath catching in my throat. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dim, flickering glow against the inside of the tent. I lay there frozen, straining to hear what had disturbed me. At first, there was nothing, just the soft sigh of the wind through the trees and the occasional creak of branches. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and far too heavy to be a deer or anything else I could rationalize. Thud, thud. The sound was unmistakable. Whatever was out there was big. Each step seemed to shake the earth beneath it, vibrating up through the cold ground. I held my breath, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. What the hell? I whispered, my voice barely audible in the stifling darkness of the tent. The footsteps grew louder, closer. My mind raced, frantically searching for an explanation, but none of the usual suspects made sense. It wasn't the light, skittering sound of a raccoon or the soft padding of a coyote. This was something much larger, something deliberate. Thud, thud. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking. When I finally gripped it, I pointed it toward the tent flap, praying that whatever was out there would stay away from the small circle of light. My mind flickered back to the strange break in the trees I'd seen earlier, the massive, flattened trail that seemed too big for a bear. I swallowed hard. No. It can't be. The breathing came next. Low, deep, and slow, like the rumble of a massive bellows pumping air into a furnace. The sound sent chills up my spine. It was close now, so close I could practically feel the thing's breath against the thin canvas of the tent. It was moving in circles around my camp, its slow, steady steps crunching over leaves and twigs, each exhale vibrating through the night. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear, every survival instinct telling me to stay silent, stay still, and hope that whatever it was would lose interest. But the breathing grew louder, closer. It was right outside the tent now. I could hear its weight shifting, the low grunt of exertion as it moved. I squeezed my eyes shut, my mind racing with every terrifying possibility. Then silence. The breathing stopped. The footsteps ceased. I opened my eyes, heart pounding. For a few seconds, everything was deathly still. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. Maybe it was gone, maybe it. Suddenly, the tent walls trembled. A massive force brushed against the fabric, so powerful it nearly knocked the tent over. I yelped, clutching my knife as I scooted back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The flashlight slipped from my fingers, casting a beam of light that danced wildly across the walls of the tent. Shadows stretched and twisted as the beam flickered, but I couldn't see anything beyond the thin fabric. Another grunt, deeper this time. Closer. My mind screamed at me to run, to burst out of the tent and make a dash for the trail, but my body refused to cooperate. I gripped the knife tighter, as if that small blade could somehow protect me from whatever was out there. Suddenly, the tent shook again, harder this time, and I heard a low, guttural growl. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, animalistic, but not like any bear or mountain lion. This sound was darker, more menacing, filled with malice. I gasped, my entire body trembling. Whatever was out there wasn't just a curious animal. It was hunting me. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was out there. With shaking hands, I grabbed the zipper of the tent flap and slowly, cautiously, pulled it open just enough to peek through. The beam of my flashlight hit the edge of the clearing, illuminating the trees in front of me, but beyond that, the darkness was impenetrable. I couldn't see anything, but the forest was unnaturally quiet now. The growling had stopped, the footsteps gone. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it, maybe the isolation was getting to me. I hesitated, debating whether to step outside or stay hidden in my flimsy shelter. My breath was shallow, and my hands were slick with sweat. I stayed there, crouched in my tent, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then I saw it. Just outside the reach of my flashlight beam, a massive shadow moved through the trees. My stomach dropped as I realized how big it was. Taller than any bear, larger than any animal I'd ever seen. The shape was vaguely humanoid, but distorted, massive in size, its arms hanging low at its sides, almost brushing the ground as it moved. Its head was huge, with shoulders so broad they seemed to blend into its body. It was there, just on the edge of the darkness, watching me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel them, boring into me with an intelligence that sent a wave of nausea through my gut. My skin crawled as the air grew thick with an unspoken threat. I backed up into the tent, my heart slamming against my ribs. The creature moved again, this time faster, a quick, fluid motion that made my blood run cold. I slammed the tent flap shut, zipping it up as fast as I could, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. All I knew was that I had to get out of there, had to get away from whatever that thing was. God, oh God, I whispered to myself, the knife slipping from my trembling fingers as I crawled toward the back of the tent. My mind raced, but I couldn't focus on anything but the sound of its movements. It was circling the camp again, coming closer with every step. I gripped the sides of the tent, praying for the dawn, praying for something to drive this nightmare away. But the creature stopped moving again, and this time it stayed still, just outside my tent. I could feel its presence, oppressive and malevolent, hovering just a few feet away. My pulse roared in my ears, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out in terror. And then it happened. A massive hand slammed against the side of the tent, pressing down on the fabric so hard I thought it would tear. I screamed, scrambling back, my heart hammering as I felt the weight of it bearing down on me. It was testing the tent, pushing against it, its growling breaths filling the air as if it knew I was trapped inside. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the pressure lifted. The footsteps started again, slow, deliberate, fading away into the forest. I listened as they grew fainter, the growling echoing in the distance, until finally, there was only silence. I sat there, trembling, drenched in sweat, unable to move. The woods had returned to their eerie quiet, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something was out there, and it wasn't done with me yet. The sun was still low in the sky when I finally crawled out of my tent. I hadn't slept after what happened the night before. My body ached from hours of lying on the hard ground, every muscle tense, braced for another assault that, thankfully, never came. But the creature's presence, the sheer terror of what I'd felt, lingered in my bones like a poison. The woods around me were unnaturally still, as if the forest was holding its breath. Even the birds had gone quiet, leaving only the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was as though the world itself had sensed what was out there, lurking just beyond the edge of the trees. I packed up camp quickly, my hands shaking with nervous energy. Every snap of a twig, every shift of the underbrush made my heart leap into my throat. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. The plan was simple. Head back to the trailhead and get as far away from this cursed place as possible. I cursed myself for coming out here alone. What had once been my sanctuary was now a nightmare, and I wanted nothing more than to leave it all behind. I shouldered my pack and set off at a brisk pace, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, my nerves shot to hell. The trail twisted through the dense woods, but the path was well-worn, easy to follow. My boots crunched against the gravel, the sound far too loud in the suffocating quiet. About a mile in, I noticed something odd. The trees ahead of me seemed darker, thicker, as if the forest itself had grown heavier with each step I took. The underbrush was more tangled, the path harder to distinguish. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and listen. That's when I heard it again. The same slow, deliberate footsteps from the night before. But this time they were closer. Much closer. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The sound was unmistakable, heavy, lumbering steps, accompanied by the soft crunch of leaves and the snapping of branches. Whatever it was coming toward me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. The forest was dense, the shadows between the trees thick and impenetrable. But I could sense it out there, moving through the trees with a purpose. I could hear the slow, steady breathing, deep, guttural, and terrifyingly close. Not again. Oh God, not again, I whispered to myself, gripping the straps of my pack as if that would somehow anchor me to reality, to sanity. I started walking again, faster this time, my legs burning as I pushed through the underbrush, barely able to keep to the trail. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. No bear or mountain lion could follow me like this. This was something else, something unnatural. The footsteps picked up pace behind me. A low growl rumbled through the trees, sending a bolt of pure terror through my body. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my ears, but no matter how fast I moved, the thing behind me matched my speed. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was getting louder, closer. I could hear the creature crashing through the trees, snapping branches like they were twigs. My mind screamed at me to move faster, but my legs were already burning with exhaustion. And then, before I could even process what was happening, it hit me. A massive force slammed into my back, knocking the wind out of me as I was thrown forward onto the trail. My face hit the dirt hard, and I tasted blood in my mouth as pain exploded through my body. My mind reeled, disoriented from the impact, but the terror kept me conscious. I tried to crawl to get away, but before I could move, I felt it. An enormous hand clamped around my ankle, so powerful it felt like a vice. I screamed, kicking wildly with my free leg, but it was no use. The thing was dragging me, effortlessly pulling me through the underbrush as if I weighed nothing. The world spun as I was dragged along the ground, my body bouncing over rocks and roots, tearing through thorns and branches. I couldn't see the creature, only the massive hand that gripped me and the crushing weight of panic. I screamed again, thrashing desperately, clawing at the dirt, trying to find something to hold on to. But the thing was too strong. It pulled me deeper into the woods, away from the trail, away from any hope of help. The sound of its breathing filled my ears, each exhale a monstrous, primal noise. I kicked at the hand with all the strength I had left, my heel connecting with something solid. The creature let out a deafening growl, and for a split second, its grip loosened. That was my chance. I twisted my body violently, yanking my leg free from its grasp. I didn't stop to think. I scrambled to my feet, half blind with terror, and ran. I sprinted through the trees, my lungs burning, my body screaming in pain. I could hear it crashing through the forest behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I knew if I slowed down, if I hesitated even for a second, it would catch me. My foot caught on a root, and I fell hard, slamming into the ground. The world spun, and I fought to catch my breath, my chest heaving as I struggled to get back on my feet. But before I could move, I heard it again, that slow, heavy breathing. I turned my head, and through the haze of pain and fear I saw it. A hulking figure stood just beyond the trees, its massive form half hidden in shadow. It was even bigger than I'd imagined, its shoulders hunched, its arms impossibly long. I couldn't make out its face, just the outline of its body, towering and monstrous, like something out of a nightmare. For a moment, it just stood there watching me. Its breathing was slow and deliberate, each exhale a low, rumbling growl. I could feel its eyes on me, piercing through the darkness, filled with a hunger I couldn't comprehend. Then it moved. With terrifying speed, the creature lunged forward, but I was already scrambling away, adrenaline surging through my veins. I ran like I'd never run before, pushing my body to its absolute limit, fueled by the raw, primal need to survive. I could hear it chasing me, crashing through the trees, snapping branches, and crushing the ground beneath its feet. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept running, praying to any god that would listen, begging for a miracle. And then, just when I thought my legs would give out, the sound of the creature's footsteps began to fade. I didn't stop. I couldn't trust it. I kept running, my body on the verge of collapse, until finally, the forest opened up into a small clearing. I stumbled into the open, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. For a moment, I stood there, hunched over, trying to catch my breath, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The woods were quiet again, as if the creature had disappeared into thin air. But I knew better. It wasn't gone. It was still out there, and it wasn't finished with me yet. My lungs burned as I stumbled through the clearing, my heart racing with terror. Every inch of me ached from being dragged through the forest like a rag doll, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. Every time I slowed, I could hear the faint rustling in the trees behind me, the sound of something massive and relentless. It wasn't far behind. "Come on, Mark," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. "Keep going. Don't stop." The forest ahead of me was dense, the underbrush thick and tangled, but I pushed forward, tripping over roots and scrambling over fallen logs. Sweat poured down my face, mixing with the dirt and blood caked to my skin. The creature's breathing, low and guttural, echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that I wasn't alone out here. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the monstrous silhouette charging after me, but there was nothing. Just trees. Just shadows. but I knew it was still there. I could feel it, lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to falter. The memory of its hand around my ankle sent a fresh wave of panic through me. It had dragged me like I was nothing, like I didn't even weigh a pound. And the smell, God, that awful musky stench, still lingered in my nose. Whatever it wasn't just some animal. It was something else, something far worse. The trail was barely visible now, more of a suggestion than a path, but I couldn't stop to think. I had to trust my instincts, keep moving forward, away from that thing. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was away from here. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pushed through a thick wall of bushes, the sharp branches scratching at my arms and face. I stumbled out the other side and nearly collapsed, my legs shaking, my vision swimming with exhaustion. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees looming larger, darker. I was losing track of where I was. Panic clawed at my throat. I can't do this, I gasped, collapsing to one knee, trying to catch my breath. My body screamed in protest, every muscle on the verge of giving out. But the fear, the fear, wouldn't let me stop. Just as I was about to force myself up again, I heard it. A distant rustle, followed by a low growl. The sound was unmistakable. It was back. My pulse quickened, and a new surge of adrenaline kicked in. I scrambled to my feet and bolted forward, my legs barely responding as I crashed through the underbrush. My breath came in shallow, ragged bursts. Every part of me screamed to stop, to collapse, to give in, but I couldn't. If I stopped, it would find me. And this time, I wouldn't get away. The trail twisted sharply, and I veered off to the right, hoping to lose it in the denser parts of the forest. I knew I couldn't outrun it forever. The only chance I had was to hide, to find some place where I could catch my breath, where the creature wouldn't find me. Up ahead, I spotted an old gnarled oak tree, its roots massive and twisting up from the earth like something out of a nightmare. Without thinking, I dove toward it, wedging myself between the thick roots, pressing my body flat against the damp ground. I lay there, my chest heaving, trying to make myself as small as possible, my eyes squeezed shut. The forest was silent again. Too silent. My heartbeat roared in my ears, drowning out everything else. I held my breath, praying I'd been fast enough, quiet enough. Then I heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps. My heart skipped a beat. It was close. I stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Each step was deliberate, purposeful. It was hunting me. _thud, thud, thud, _ it stopped. I could hear the creature breathing again, its slow, labored exhale reverberating through the trees. It was right above me now, so close that I could smell the thick, musky odor that clung to it like rotting leaves. The sound of its breath filled the air, deep and guttural. My hand instinctively went to the small hunting knife in my pack, but I knew it was useless. There was no way I could fight this thing. My only chance was to stay hidden, to pray that it wouldn't notice me. The creature shifted, the ground beneath it crunching as it moved. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sound, trying to convince myself that I was invisible. But I could feel its presence, looming over me like a nightmare made flesh. I heard it grunt softly, a sound that made my skin crawl, and then it took another step forward. My muscles were so tense I thought they might snap. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature moved on. I waited for what felt like an eternity, listening as the sound of its footsteps grew fainter, fading into the distance. My entire body trembled with relief, but I didn't dare move. Not yet, not until I was sure it was gone. After several long minutes of silence, I finally allowed myself to exhale. My body sagged against the ground, shaking with exhaustion and fear. I had gotten away. Somehow I had escaped, but I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving. Slowly, painfully, I pulled myself out from under the roots and stood on shaky legs. My entire body ached from the effort, but the adrenaline was still pumping, driving me forward. I had to get back to the trail, had to keep going. I stumbled through the forest, my vision blurred with exhaustion and pain. The trail was gone now, lost to the thick undergrowth and my frantic flight. I had no idea where I was, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay in these woods another night. Not with that thing out there. As I pushed through the trees, the forest began to thin slightly, and I spotted something through the branches ahead. The faint outline of a ranger station, just visible through the trees. Relief flooded through me. Safety. Help. I stumbled toward the station, my legs barely holding me up. But as I neared the edge of the trees, I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps. I could hear them again. Slow. Deliberate. It was still following me. Panic surged through me as I bolted for the station, my legs screaming in protest. I didn't care anymore. I had to make it. I had to survive. I burst out of the trees, my eyes locking onto the station just 100 yards away. I was so close, but I could feel it behind me. The ranger station loomed in front of me, an oasis of hope in the chaos that had consumed my life over the last several hours. I stumbled toward it, my legs barely supporting me, blood dripping from countless scrapes and cuts. I could still feel the creature behind me, even though I hadn't heard its footsteps in what felt like forever. I didn't care. I wasn't stopping. Not until I was inside. I threw myself against the door, slamming my fist into it with all the strength I had left. "Help! Please!" I gasped, my voice hoarse from screaming, my throat raw and dry. "Someone please!" The door creaked open, and I nearly collapsed as I fell inside. 2 rangers stared at me, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as they took in the sight of me. Filthy, bleeding, and wild-eyed. "Jesus," one of them muttered. He was a tall man with a thick beard and a weathered face. "What the hell happened to you?" I couldn't catch my breath. My entire body shook, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. Something's out there," I panted, clutching at my chest. It attacked me. It dragged me into the woods. The other ranger, a younger woman with short blonde hair, stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Slow down," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Let's get you inside and cleaned up. You're safe now." Safe. The word hung in the air like an empty promise. I wasn't sure if I could ever feel safe again, but I nodded, too exhausted to argue. They guided me to a chair inside the small station. The warm glow of the overhead lights a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness outside. I winced as I sat down, my entire body aching from the relentless abuse it had taken. The woman grabbed a first aid kit and began cleaning the scrapes on my arms, her hands steady but her eyes filled with concern. "Tell us what happened," the bearded ranger said, kneeling in front of me. "You said something attacked you?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I've ever seen before. It was huge, taller than any man, and strong. It dragged me through the forest like I was nothing." I shuddered at the memory, my body still feeling the phantom grip of the creature's hand around my ankle. The rangers exchanged a glance, and I could see the doubt creeping into their faces. The woman continued cleaning my wounds, but she was listening intently, her expression carefully neutral. "I thought it was a bear at first," I said, my voice shaky. "But bears they don't follow people like that. They don't hunt people down. This thing, it was intelligent. It was waiting for me, watching me." The bearded ranger leaned back on his heels, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "You're sure it wasn't a bear? There are black bears around here, and they can get pretty aggressive if they feel threatened." "I'm telling you, it wasn't a bear." I snapped, frustration boiling over. I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. They thought I was just some paranoid hiker who'd had a run-in with wildlife. But they didn't know. They hadn't seen it. The woman placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice softening. "Hey, it's okay. We're just trying to understand. You've been through a lot." I shook my head, tears of exhaustion and fear welling up in my eyes. "It's still out there," I whispered. "It's still following me." The words hung heavy in the air, but the rangers remained silent. The bearded man stood up, sighing as he walked over to the radio on the desk. "We'll send out a search team in the morning," he said, his tone professional, but there was an underlying note of dismissal. "We'll check the area where you were attacked, see if we can find any sign of the animal. In the meantime, why don't you stay here tonight? Get some rest." I clenched my fists, my body trembling with frustration. They weren't taking me seriously. They were treating me like I was some kind of hysterical camper, making wild claims after a bad night in the woods. "No, you don't understand," I said, my voice rising. "This thing isn't like anything you've seen before. It's not an animal. It's something else. I felt it. I saw it." The woman glanced at the bearded man, then back at me, her expression sympathetic but unconvinced. "You've been through a traumatic experience," she said gently. "It's possible your mind is trying to make sense of what happened. Sometimes, when we're scared, our brains can play tricks on us." I stared at her, incredulous. "You think I imagined this?" "I'm not saying that," she replied quickly. "But you were in a high-stress situation. Fear can do strange things to the mind." A wave of helplessness crashed over me. I was trying to tell them the truth, to warn them about what was out there, but they didn't believe me. No one would. Not without proof. "I know what I saw," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was real. It's still real." The rangers exchanged another glance, and I could see they had already made up their minds. They weren't going to take me seriously. They would send out a search team in the morning, probably find nothing, and chalk it up to a bear attack or a case of panic. But I knew better. I knew that whatever had attacked me wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was still out there, lurking in the woods, waiting for its next victim. The woman finished bandaging my arm and gave me a small smile. "Why don't you try to get some sleep? We'll take care of everything." Sleep. The idea seemed laughable, but I nodded anyway, too tired to argue. My body was on the verge of collapse, even though my mind refused to let go of the fear. The bearded ranger showed me to a small cot in the back room of the station, and I sank down onto it, my body aching with exhaustion. But as I lay there in the dim light, staring at the ceiling, the sounds of the forest outside crept back into my consciousness. The wind rustled the leaves, the branches creaked, and every little sound sent a jolt of terror through me. I could still hear the creatures breathing in the back of my mind, its footsteps echoing in my memory. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there waiting. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I began to drift off, I imagined that hand wrapping around my ankle again, pulling me into the darkness. I rolled onto my side, clutching the blanket tightly, my body trembling. No one believed me. No one would ever believe me. But I knew, and that was the worst part. I was alone with this nightmare, with no one to help me, no one to understand what I had been through. The creature was still out there, and I was powerless to stop it. As exhaustion finally began to pull me into a fitful sleep, one thought haunted me more than any other. What if it comes back? I woke to the sound of soft murmurs filtering through the thin walls of the ranger station. My body was stiff, every muscle protesting as I rolled off the cot and onto my feet. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The horrors of the previous day and night felt distant, like a half-remembered nightmare. But as soon as I glanced down at my torn, blood-stained clothes, it all came rushing back. The creature, the chase, the terror. I staggered to the small bathroom, splashing cold water onto my face, trying to shake the lingering exhaustion. My reflection in the cracked mirror looked like a ghost, pale skin, bloodshot eyes, dirt smudged across my cheeks. I hardly recognized myself. The voices outside grew louder. I caught snatches of conversation, something about a search team, about checking the trails. They were talking about me, about what happened. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the room, into the main area of the station. The two rangers from the night before, the tall, bearded one and the young woman, were standing near the radio, discussing something in hushed tones. They both looked up when they saw me. "Morning," the bearded ranger said, nodding slightly. His name tag read _Carter_. "How you holding up?" I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat was still dry, my voice a raspy croak. I don't know." The woman, _Holt_, glanced at Carter, then back at me. "We're sending out a search team in a little while," she said, her voice calm and professional. "A couple of rangers are going to sweep the area where you said you were attacked. We'll see if we can find any signs of the animal." "It wasn't an animal," I replied, more sharply than I intended. I could see the doubt still lingering in their eyes, as if they'd already written off my account. "I told you, it wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. This thing, it was different." Carter sighed and folded his arms. "Look, I've been working these mountains for over 15 years. I've seen plenty of weird stuff out there, bears, wolves, even a few feral dogs. When people get scared, their minds can exaggerate things. You were in shock, probably dehydrated. It's possible your memory is playing tricks on you." I stared at him, my frustration boiling over. "You think I made this up? You think I just imagined something dragging me through the woods?" I pointed to the scrapes and bruises covering my arms, the deep purple marks still visible where the creature's hand had wrapped around my ankle. "Does this look like something I imagined?" Holt stepped forward, her expression more sympathetic, but there was still a thin layer of skepticism in her voice. "We don't doubt you were attacked. Something happened to you out there, no question. But without evidence, I know what I saw," I interrupted. "This thing was huge, taller than any person, bigger than any bear. It was strong enough to drag me like I was nothing. And it's still out there." Carter exchanged another glance with Holt, and I could see the conversation slipping away from me, the truth disappearing into the realm of disbelief. They weren't going to take me seriously. Not really. Not without something tangible. Holt spoke again, her tone measured. "We'll do everything we can to find out what happened. If it's a dangerous animal, we'll take care of it. But it's important that we keep an open mind. People get lost in these woods all the time, and sometimes their fear makes them. I cut her off again, my voice trembling with frustration. You're not listening. I'm not confused. I'm not hallucinating. There's something out there, something that isn't a bear or a wolf or anything else you've seen. Carter rubbed his chin, clearly trying to find the right words. Look, Mark, you've been through a traumatic event. Your brain is in survival mode, and sometimes it can... Stop, I snapped, my voice cracking. Just stop. You weren't there. You didn't see it. I did. And if you don't do something, more people are going to get hurt. Or worse. Silence hung heavy in the air. They both stood there, staring at me, neither of them knowing what to say. Finally, Holt spoke again, softer this time. We're not dismissing you, Mark. But we have to work with what we know. We'll send the team out, and if they find anything unusual, we'll go from there. I knew it was the best answer I was going to get, but it felt like a slap in the face. They didn't believe me. Not really. They were humoring me, treating me like some half-crazed hiker who'd let his imagination run wild. I swallowed the bitter taste of anger and nodded stiffly. Fine. Do what you have to do. Carter cleared his throat. In the meantime, you should rest. We'll call you if we find anything. Rest? I couldn't rest. My mind was still racing, replaying every horrific moment from the night before. The creature's growl, its massive hand wrapping around my leg, the way it moved through the forest with terrifying speed. I couldn't shut it off, couldn't push the images out of my head. I turned away from them, walking toward the small table in the corner of the room, where a pot of stale coffee sat steaming. My hands shook as I poured myself a cup, trying to focus on the mundane task instead of the whirlwind of fear and frustration churning inside me. As I sat down, staring into the dark liquid, I overheard Carter and Holt talking quietly again. He's spooked, Carter muttered. I've seen it before. Hikers get lost, panic, and everything starts looking like a monster in the dark. Holt sighed. Yeah, but those bruises, something got a hold of him. Probably a bear, Carter replied. They don't always kill. Sometimes they just knock people around a bit, rough them up. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shake them, to make them understand that this wasn't some confused bear attack. But what good would it do? They weren't going to listen. They had their own explanations, and nothing I said was going to change their minds. The worst part was that I knew there wouldn't be any evidence. The creature was smart, too smart. It wouldn't leave tracks or obvious signs of its presence. And even if it did, they would rationalize it away, call it a bear or maybe even a hoax. I was alone in this. A few minutes later, Carter walked over to me, his expression softer now. Mark, we'll let you know as soon as we hear back from the team. Why don't you stay here for a while? Clear your head. Yeah, I muttered, not looking up. Sure. He hesitated, then patted my shoulder awkwardly before walking away. I sat there, staring down at my coffee, the smell of it bitter and sharp. No one believed me. No one ever would. And the thing that had hunted me was still out there, waiting. Hours passed. I sat in that cramped, musty ranger station, staring blankly out the window as the search team combed through the woods. Every time the radio crackled with static, I jumped, hoping for a word from the rangers that they had found something, anything, to confirm what I'd seen. But the radio remained mostly silent, save for the occasional murmured report of nothing yet. I wasn't surprised. Deep down, I knew they wouldn't find anything. The thing that had attacked me wasn't just some animal, it was smarter than that. It knew how to cover its tracks, how to blend into the forest like a ghost. It had survived out there for God knows how long, and it wasn't going to leave any evidence behind. But I had to try. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. Eventually, Carter came back into the room, his face lined with fatigue, but still bearing that same look of quiet skepticism. Search team's been out for a few hours now, he said, standing in front of me. They've covered the area where you said it happened. So far, no signs of anything unusual. No tracks, no fur, no blood, nothing. I looked up at him, my stomach twisting. That's impossible. There has to be something. Did they check the exact spot? Near the clearing where the trail bends? Carter nodded, his expression unchanged. We've covered a good mile around that area. It's thick, but if there was something out there, we'd have found a trace by now. I shook my head, my heart sinking. It's hiding. It knows how to stay hidden. He sighed, pulling a chair over to sit across from me. His voice softened, but I could still hear the edge of doubt in it. Look, Mark, I'm not saying you didn't experience something terrifying. Clearly, you went through hell out there, but we have to deal with facts. And right now, the facts are pointing toward a bear encounter. Maybe a black bear got spooked, chased you. Damn it, Carter, I told you. It wasn't a bear. I slammed my fist on the table, my voice rising in frustration. It was something else. Something big and wrong. Carter held up his hands, trying to calm me down. All right, but you've got to understand, without hard evidence, all we can do is speculate. We can't go telling people there's a monster in the woods with no proof. I sank back in the chair, rubbing my hands over my face. Proof. That's all they cared about. As if the bruises on my body, the terror I felt, weren't enough. I needed to find something they couldn't dismiss so easily. I want to go back out there, I muttered. Holt, who had been quietly standing by the radio, looked up, surprised. What? I need to go back, I said, my voice firmer now. I need to see it for myself. Maybe there's something you missed, something I can recognize. Carter's brow furrowed. Mark, that's not a good idea. You've been through a lot already. The last thing you need is to go back into those woods and relive whatever happened. I'm not asking, I said, standing up and grabbing my jacket. I'm going. If you won't help me, I'll do it myself. Hold on, Carter said, standing too, blocking my path. We can't let you go back out there alone, especially in your condition. Holt stepped forward, her voice more measured. Look, we understand you're frustrated, but going back out there could be dangerous. If there's a bear, or whatever it was, you could get hurt again. Please, I said, my voice cracking. I have to know. I need to find proof. Otherwise, no one's ever going to believe me. You don't believe me? Holt glanced at Carter, who rubbed the back of his neck, sighing. After a tense moment, Carter finally nodded. All right, he said reluctantly. But I'm coming with you. I don't want you getting lost out there again. Holt grabbed her jacket. I'll come too. It'll be safer if we stick together. I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and desperation. Maybe with them alongside me, I could find something that would make them believe, something to prove that I wasn't losing my mind. We set out just after noon, the woods still shrouded in a blanket of eerie quiet. The trail was familiar now, each twisted root and broken branch a reminder of the terror I had experienced only hours ago. My skin prickled as we passed the spot where the creature had grabbed me, the memories fresh and raw. We followed the same path I had taken when I escaped, the trail winding deeper into the forest. Carter led the way, his hand resting on the rifle slung across his back, his eyes scanning the trees. Holt walked beside me, her expression cautious, but I could sense her unease. Neither of them said much, and the silence between us grew heavier the farther we went. Finally, we reached the spot, the clearing where it had all begun. My heart raced as I stepped into the open space, the air thick with tension. I scanned the area, searching for anything, any sign that the creature had been here. But the ground looked undisturbed, the trees standing tall and silent, as if nothing had ever happened. It was right here, I said, pointing to the spot where I had collapsed after breaking free. This is where I saw it. This is where it grabbed me. Carter knelt down, running his fingers through the dirt. I don't see anything out of the ordinary. No tracks, no drag marks. That doesn't mean it wasn't here, I snapped. Maybe it covered its tracks. Maybe it's smarter than we think. Holt looked around, her brow furrowed. If it's as big as you say, it would have left some kind of sign. A broken branch, disturbed underbrush. But everything here looks normal. I clenched my fists, frustration boiling over. I know what I saw. Carter stood up, brushing dirt from his hands. We believe that you think you saw something, Mark. But sometimes fear can. No. I cut him off, my voice rising. I'm not imagining this. It was real. It's still out here, watching us. Carter and Holt exchanged a glance, the same look of quiet doubt I had seen all morning. I felt the weight of it, the disbelief, the dismissal. They were humoring me, going through the motions, but they didn't really believe me. I was just some scared hiker who had panicked in the dark, nothing more. Desperation clawed at my throat. I couldn't let it end like this. I had to find something. Frantically, I began searching the ground, kicking through the leaves, pushing aside branches. My heart raced, my hands trembling as I combed the area. There had to be something. A footprint, a strand of hair, anything. Mark, Holt's voice was soft but firm. Maybe it's time to go back. We've been out here for hours. If there was something, we would have found it by now. I ignored her, dropping to my knees as I dug through the underbrush. No, it's here. It has to be here. Carter stepped forward, his tone gentle but insistent. Come on, man. Let's head back. You're exhausted. We'll keep looking, but right now, suddenly I froze. There, half buried under a pile of leaves, was something. A long, thick strand of hair, dark and matted. My heart skipped a beat. I found something, I whispered, my voice trembling. Look. Carter and Holt crouched beside me, their expressions shifting from skepticism to surprise. Holt reached out, carefully picking up the strand of hair. What the hell? Carter frowned, examining it closely. It's not from a bear. I looked at them, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time, they weren't dismissing me. For the first time, I saw it in their eyes. Belief. Maybe it wasn't enough proof to convince everyone, but it was something. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. And whatever was out there, it was real. The drive back to town was a blur. Carter sat in the front seat of the Ranger truck, silent, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror as if trying to gauge my state of mind. Holt rode beside him, turning the strand of dark hair over and over in her hands, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was holding. Neither of them said much after we left the woods. I couldn't tell if they were shocked or simply didn't want to talk about what we'd found. That long, thick strand of hair, matted and coarse, wasn't from any bear or wolf. They knew it, and so did I. But what did it prove? A single piece of hair, no tracks, no sightings. It was something, yes, but not enough. Not enough to make people believe what had really happened. Not enough to convince anyone that something unnatural was stalking those woods. I leaned my head against the cold window, watching the trees whip by. My mind was still racing, playing over every moment of that night. The thing's massive hand dragging me through the underbrush, the low, guttural growl, the way it had followed me like a predator stalking its prey. My body was here, but my mind was still out there in those woods, reliving the terror over and over again. As we pulled into the small ranger station parking lot, Carter finally spoke, breaking the long silence. "We'll send the hair to the lab," he said, his voice low and cautious. "See what they can find out. Might be able to match it with a known species." I nodded, though the pit in my stomach told me the lab wouldn't find anything. No DNA match. No known species. They'd tell us it was a freak anomaly, something that didn't fit into any neat category, something easy to dismiss. Holt turned around in her seat, looking at me. "It's a start, Mark. You weren't imagining things. Whatever it is, it's real." I wanted to believe her, to find comfort in her words, but there was a hesitancy in her voice, a trace of lingering doubt. They'd seen strange things before, sure, but this was something else. Something they weren't ready to fully admit to yet. "You know, no one's going to believe me," I said quietly, staring down at my scraped and bruised hands. "Not without more." Carter sighed, shutting off the engine. "It's not about belief. We need evidence. Hard proof. If we find something concrete, something we can bring to people, then they'll listen. But what if there's nothing else to find?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "What if that thing is smarter than we think? What if it doesn't leave a trace?" Holt placed the hair carefully into a plastic bag, sealing it up. "We'll keep searching the area. If it's still out there, we'll find it." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I believed her. Something told me that creature had already moved on, slinking back into the shadows, leaving no trace behind except for the horrors it had burned into my memory. After Carter and Holt dropped me off at the small motel on the edge of town, I showered and sat on the bed, staring blankly at the flickering TV. The news was on, but the voices were just noise in the background. The room felt too small, too suffocating, like the walls were closing in around me. My mind was stuck on a loop, replaying the events over and over, searching for answers that wouldn't come. When the phone rang, I jumped, startled by the sound. My heart raced as I reached for it, half expecting some new revelation, some piece of information that would explain everything. It was Holt. "We just heard back from the lab," she said, her voice tense. "They can't match the hair to any known animal. It's inconclusive." Of course it was. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle in my chest like a heavy stone. "Inconclusive," I repeated. "That's it?" "They ran every test they could," Holt continued, a note of frustration in her voice. "It's not from any animal they've documented in this area, or anywhere else, for that matter. It's just unidentifiable." I let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. "So what now? People will just think I'm crazy." Again, Holt was silent for a moment, then she sighed. "Look, I believe you. Carter does too. But without more evidence, more evidence." I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "What more do you need?" It attacked me. "I nearly died out there. But no one's going to believe that, are they?" "Mark," she said softly, "I know this is hard. But without something definitive, it's going to be impossible to convince anyone. We'll keep investigating, I promise. But right now, we don't have enough." I didn't answer. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. I hung up the phone and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling. Inconclusive. Unidentifiable. What good were those words? They wouldn't help me sleep at night. They wouldn't erase the memories of that thing's heavy breathing, or the feel of its hand dragging me through the dirt. I rolled over, pulling the thin motel blanket up to my chin, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The massive silhouette moving through the trees, the eyes I never saw but could still feel watching me, the weight of its presence pressing down on me like a predator toying with its prey. I couldn't escape it. Not here, not in this tiny room, not anywhere. The next morning, I packed up my things and left the motel. The town was quiet, sleepy, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. A few people nodded politely as I passed by, but I could feel their eyes on me, could feel the invisible wall between us. They didn't know what I'd been through. They wouldn't understand, even if I told them. As I walked to the bus station, the feeling of being watched crept over me again. I stopped, looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature standing there, waiting for me in the shadows. But the street was empty. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. I bought my ticket and boarded the bus, sinking into the seat by the window. The town slowly faded into the distance, and the thick forest loomed once again on the horizon. I pressed my forehead against the glass, my breath fogging the window. The thing was still out there, somewhere in those woods, lurking, waiting. And no one believed me. No one would. All I had now was the memory of what happened. The bruises would fade, the scratches would heal, but the fear? That would stay with me forever. I would always feel it, the shadow in the corner of my vision, the sound of heavy footsteps just out of earshot, the sense that something terrible was watching me from the dark. And I knew deep down that one day it might come back. And next time, I wouldn't be so lucky.